you every week on Judge Napolitano's show.
Oh, thank you.
Like clockwork. I was just listening to you before. I didn't get a chance to finish the past last 10 minutes of it, but I guess we can fill in the dots. But yeah, I'm glad you're doing well. I wish we had like a more uplifting topic to speak about. It's, whenever we talk, it's always something tragic. But
yeah.
it is. Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? It's like you have to talk about it.
Well, what moment of human history was there? If they had podcasts 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, what would they have been talking about? It's the same.
I don't know, but I would listen to that.
It'd be a fantastic podcast, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so this is the reality of human existence. It's the reality of our history as a species, and this is what we have to talk. I mean, but I also too, like that 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock stop for me is because I need to do that because I need to do something else. Like I can't ingest this all day and talk about it all day and listen to it all day and then not have a break from it. So like I get into the evening and I have to put on Netflix or HBO or whatever and get that escapism, even for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. And because I need that. Otherwise I'll get burned out. I won't be any good at this. It's marginal whether I'm good at it to begin with. So you really got to be careful.
You don't give yourself enough credit. In the spirit of that, then, Henry, why don't we just go ahead and get started so we can get Matt?
I think we're starting. I think we already started. I do have a follow up just to go back to what would people be podcasting about 500 years ago. I imagine one of the big topics would be like Pope stuff on the Protestant. We got a lot of anti-Pope stuff, and then probably a lot of anti-Ottoman Empire podcast. Those would be two really popular subjects.
Yeah.
Imagine the divisiveness between like in Germany between Catholics and Protestants, like how divisive the podcasting scene would be.
Oh, I'm going to throw this into ChatGPT. That sounds like a fun prompt. Give me a podcast episode that would have been recorded 500 years ago, right?
500 years ago is what, 1624? So
yeah, right in the 30-year war.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Oh my God, it would be the 30-year war.
Yeah. Right in like the fourth phase of the 30-year war.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember my history, and you'd probably still have some. I'm not going to try and speculate because I'll get my dates all wrong. I was going to say something about people debating about whether Gutenberg is a good thing or not. What is the printing press going to do for us? But I think I'm off by about 100 years on that.
I think
right,
so.
Give me some plausible podcast
about 500
topics.
years ago, it was like the final, because the 30-year war was in 3 stages. There was like the beginning stage of when it was just like a regional German war, and then it turned into like a more regional war with Denmark and then Sweden, and then France entered the war, but they were on the side of the Protestants, and it was just like it was a lot like how we've made the comparison before that the religious wars 500 years ago are very similar to the religious wars that took place in the Middle East about 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, I just, do you guys know Danny Davis, retired lieutenant colonel?
Yes, I know of him.
Yeah, so Danny was saying the other day, specifically about the 30-year war. He said, I remember, learning about that, and I was a kid in school, and just thinking, how stupid. How could anybody fight for 30 years? How stupid. And then having the realization of, like, that's exactly what my whole adult life has been.
Yeah.
This has been... however you want to phrase it, but you look at just that the world war that the United States has executed from Western Africa through Pakistan for the last 30 years, my entire adult life, right? I mean, so yeah, we have been in like a 30 years war, and it can break down, as you were saying, Henry, along the lines of religious or ethnic, or so it's yeah, I mean, the podcast, podcasting back then would have done pretty well.
It's interesting that you say that, because I was thinking about that yesterday. we are kind of in a world war, but it's a different kind of world war where it's like suns, like stars in general, right? The bigger they are, the quicker they explode, right? On a cosmic scale, right? Very large sun, very hot war. It ends very quickly, but this has been kind of like a slower burn over a longer period of time. But it is indeed a world war, right? The whole world has been at war in some capacity.
Oh, I mean, just in a sense of from an American perspective,
Mm-hmm.
or people looking at America, maybe better way to describe it. Again, there has been no part of the Muslim world, particularly, that has been untouched by the
Mm-hmm.
United States military in the last 30 years, with a very few exceptions. With very few exceptions, I'd be struggling to think of even nations like Morocco. Certainly, what you have happening with Western Sahara. You can
Mm-hmm.
tie all this into this, but that's where we had a lot of our black sites. Like that type of crossover as well. So even if it wasn't, direct U.S. military killing people on the ground, there was that presence in their own government's actions that were tied to it, directly. I mean, so
Yep.
certainly, I mean, if just think about it from the west coast of Africa all the way to Pakistan, like just who has not been touched by the American military in some way, or our proxies haven't
Mm-hmm.
been devastated by it. It's hard to think of a nation that hasn't. I mean, Jordan comes to mind to a degree, but even then, I remember they had some terrible suicide bombings in Amman in the early days of the Iraq War, the first couple of years of the Iraq War, as well as just all other aspects of it. But yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, let's
Crazy.
talk about the I guess the most pressing topic. What? So I'm having a hard time kind of figuring out what happened with these pager bombs or these cell phone bombs. What is your do you have any insight into like what that operation was, like what the Mossad was thinking, if it was some master plan? Because what I see on the internet is all like, oh man, the Mossad is so badass, like they just pulled out like the greatest attack, the most sophisticated attack ever. The Mossad is back.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing a lot online. I want to hear, I guess, what your take is on it.
That's certainly part of it. That's one of them. That's maybe the most successful aspect of that operation is you had the Hollywood tale of it. You had the American press and the American politicians going crazy over it, right? I mean, John Fetterman celebrating it on Twitter. I mean, so that was a huge part of it, I believe, was the information operations of the Mossad and of Israel to continue the mythology of Israel. Certainly, people are familiar with. I remember 20 years ago the film Munich. There are all other types of films that display the competence and the aptitude and the righteousness of the Israeli intelligence services. Certainly, whether it's like the HBO series, which I've not seen, Tehran, but also there's other ones as well. I'm blanking on the one that is very popular. But anyway, yeah, I mean, certainly that was part of it, Henry. I mean, this idea of promoting the narrative, the mythology of Israel in the West. So the political is people have to remember. You go back to your Clausewitz, right, and you have tactical, operational, strategic, and political levels of warfare. And that is the way it ascends. They ascend in importance, and the political is the most important. A lot of people don't like that. They want the strategy to be the most important, right? They want the big arrow movements or the decisions by the generals to be the most important things, the battlefield successes or losses to be the most important things. But ultimately, it comes down to the political decisions that are made or the political consequences of those tactical, operational, or strategic actions. So, I mean, certainly there was that. And I would have to believe that there was an element of the planning in this that where they expected to have this type of reaction, they'd be able to sell it as this targeted counter-terror operation that only hurt Hezbollah terrorists. And of course, that's not what happened at all.
Right.
The scale and scope of this is, to be fair, to be objective here, is impressive. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
got to give credit where credit is due, right? I mean, in the sense that this was a very clever and also very well prepared attack. I mean, we'll know more in the future about it, and of course, we have to be careful about what we think we know because the Israelis are so good about telling us what we think we know. We certainly saw that go back to July when Ismail Haniyeh is killed in Tehran. And the New York Times, right out of the gate, has this story that's sourced with 6 different sources, et cetera, about how the Mossad got a bomb put into this Iranian safe house months ago, and and that story was bogus. That was a planted story to try and further the information operations involved in Haniyeh's assassination, including trying to sow concern and consternation and tension within the Iranians themselves. How did they get a bomb in here? No, they didn't. They shot a missile at it. That's what they did. So we got to be careful with what we think we know. But that said, what we think we know is that the Israelis, years ago it must have been, started front companies in Eastern Europe, Hungary and Bulgaria.
BAC Consulting, what it was called?
Right. And that they had to have established, if not manufacturing capacities, because what I understand now is that the manufacturer of these pagers shipped them from Taiwan, and then they were reassembled in Eastern Europe, repackaged, and then distributed.
Golden Apollo would be the name of that company.
That's right. But and we'll get to the walkie-talkies in a second. But the idea being is that, okay, how did they get about then selling these pagers to Hezbollah? They must have had other operations preceding this to build up their trust, right? To build a customer base,
sales organization.
That's exactly right. So when you start pulling this back, what they must have what they had to do to get this, it is really impressive. With the walkie-talkies, I've not seen the explanation on that. I've not seen the details yet. Maybe it's out there. I haven't seen it as to what we've seen with the pagers. And a lot of this, we have to be getting careful what we think we know. But certainly, this plan would have involved, the idea that it was going to be done in concert with a massive military operation. And from what we understand, the Israelis realized that Hezbollah knew about these devices, and so it became a use it or lose it moment. At the same time, too, the timing wasn't so bad anyway. I believe that for the Israelis, now is the time. You've only got 6 months before the U.S. elections. If you want the U.S. to come into war with you, if you want to use the full weight of your Israel lobby in the U.S. to pressure the Americans into doing things they don't want to do, well, you better do it now. You've only got 6 weeks. So the timing still is pretty good. And things have been ratcheting up, as we all know. The tensions were all there. Certainly the state of war as it existed was already present. So it seemed as if it was done in a manner that was rushed, but they still hope to at least follow on with the strikes we've seen. And the strikes we have seen from the Israelis have been massive. If this isn't, if today and yesterday and the day before aren't the first days of the long-expected Israel-Hezbollah war, and it really should be called an Israel-Lebanon war, the Lebanese army has made it clear it will be included in the war on Hezbollah's side, if these aren't the first days of that war, I don't know what that would look like then. The Israeli Air Force is saying that they've never launched as many airstrikes as they have in a particular operation. They had 250 fighter jets take part in their air raids the last couple of days. So this is quite large. We can get other aspects of this pager walkie-talkie attack, including whether it actually had any real effect other than the political, other than the morale aspects of it. And that seems pretty doubtful. We're not even really sure who the targets were. There's some debate out there as to how these pagers were actually used by Hezbollah. Certainly, if they were actually at military sites, the understanding is that they had a dedicated fiber optic secure system that they used. That this was mainly people who were off duty, so to speak, as well as the fact that these pagers and walkie-talkies were used by non-military aspects of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a governing structure. It's not a military. It has a military, it has an armed wing, it has a military force, but it also is the governing structure in large parts of Lebanon, particularly in the south. And so, many of these people who would have had these pagers were civil administrators, were social workers, were healthcare workers, were teachers. you know, and of course the idea of these things being set off in a discriminating or a targeted counter-terror operation is just complete bull. You know, I mean, these things
Right.
went off wherever they went off, you know, and as we've all
Hmm.
seen, lots and lots of civilians were killed and wounded. The stories of, you know, a little girl who her dad's pager beeps, and so she picks it up to bring it to her, to bring it to
Yep.
him, and she gets killed, right? I mean, like, you know,
Hmm.
everyone can imagine that moment when this beautiful little girl dutifully brings this pager to her father and is killed. And if that's not an act of terror, if that's not a gross violation of international law, the laws of armed conflict, you know, I really don't know what is.
Well, that really, for me, removes all doubt that this wasn't a precision or targeted attack. It was
Yep.
widespread, right? I mean, just even if you were to call into question some of the points that you had made about a lot of these devices being used by like non-military Hezbollah affiliated peoples, it doesn't matter you if you can't account for all the collateral damage that
Right.
it incurs, right? And you can't calculate that, right? You couldn't calculate the little girl picking up the pager. You couldn't calculate the person that was sitting at the I saw the one video where she's at the
Oh, the cash
grocery
register.
store,
Yeah.
yeah, at the cash register, and her face gets exploded on, right? And
Yeah.
unclear what the condition of that woman is, who was exploded. And she had nothing to do with that, right? And so, but then that just kind of ties into, I believe, the policies of the Israeli military and their intelligence services of how much collateral damage they're willing to exact in order to, you know, pull the trigger, so to speak. And I think personally, it was kind of ingenious. And as much as like I'm fascinated by it from a technical perspective,
Mm-hmm.
like the logistics involved and the preparation that was needed, and just the sheer like crazy idea that someone greenlit some time ago, right? As much as I'm interested in that, I just can't help thinking about it. And I was talking to Henry before we jumped on the call that, like, why are you wasting this much energy doing something so niche and so diabolical? Why not apply that energy to having stopped October 7th in the first place, right?
Right.
Like, I feel like if you have that much creativity, that much genius, that many resources to pull something like this off, I don't know. Like, it really calls into question the motivations, and and the operating policies, for me at least.
No, no, it's certainly, but this is the Israeli form of war. It is a
Yeah.
punitive, a punishing form of war meant to not only deter, but to take vengeance. And this has always been the Israeli form of war. This is the policy known as the Iron Wall, which essentially states that Israeli responses to any attacks, any threats, will be met with such overwhelming force that the other side will not just be militarily defeated, but politically and morally and defeated in the sense that they're afraid to do something again. And but you also have to combine it in with Israel itself, the way it was founded. It was founded in terrorism, whether the Stern Gang or the Irgun that come out of the Haganah, which is the predecessor to the Israeli Defense Forces. I mean, people are probably familiar with the King David Hotel attack in 1947, which many people will say that's the first example of modern terror. But that is essentially how the Israelis conduct themselves against the British authorities, as well as against their Palestinian Arab neighbors. Certainly during the ethnic cleansing in the late 40s, terror was the prime aspect. What else is terrorism than going into a people's village, burning their homes down, killing all their livestock, and forcing them to flee, murdering those who put up any resistance in a brutal and often humiliating manner? I mean, you just see this over and over again. 67, it's the same thing. When Israel goes into, now particularly for Lebanon, when Israel goes into Lebanon in 82, they really define modern state terror. I mean, the way the Israelis behave in Lebanon in the 80s is brutal. I mean, they are detonating car bombs in Beirut. They're using their Christian militia proxies to carry out just vile massacres. I mean, vile massacres, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you see it in 06 when Israel goes back in again, and they establish what they currently have, the Dahiyah Doctrine, which is essentially we will mete out such punishment on the civilians of our opposition that the collapse in the society, the consequences of society will be just from this brute force we bring onto them. right? I mean, so you have it, in that doctrine is named after the neighborhood that Israel essentially demolishes as a form of collective punishment, as a form of trying to weaken any type of Lebanese resistance. And of course, we see how they conduct themselves in the West Bank, how they see they can conduct themselves, the genocide in Gaza. I mean, this is using terror, whether it's the brute, violent force, whether it's the act of humiliation, or the act, and you can even apply this to the way Israel conducts itself in its affairs overseas. The use of making your opponents politically afraid of you, and you've seen how well successful they are with that here in the United States, and to a large degree in Britain as well.
They've coined a rather ironic term for it recently. Some Israeli officials were on video saying that this is called de-escalation through escalation.
Yeah, escalate to de-escalate. That's a standard. That's standard though. That is, if you look at U.S.
That's so wild.
What's scary, why everyone should really take a breath and sit down and like ponder where the hell we are as a species. That is a defining doctrine in both American and Russian nuclear warfare. This idea of escalate to de-escalate. That we will, and particularly for the Americans, the idea was, and the Russians have just really disabused us of this notion quite publicly in the last few weeks. But this idea that we can escalate with the Russians because we've got Europe as a buffer. So if this thing does go nuclear, it's going to start off small. And so we'll lose Warsaw, or we'll lose Bucharest. We'll lose Paris maybe. That'd be tragic, but it won't be Miami. It won't be New York. It won't be LA. This idea of escalate to de-escalate, that you push the other side to a point when they say, "Uncle, enough. We can't go any further." And that is a defining doctrinal aspect, across the board for many nations. And
objectively, does that work?
You tell me. You keep pushing somebody, what happens, right?
You're going to push back eventually.
And I think China might be a great example of this, right? The idea that we're just going to continue to cow China. Bill Clinton's going to sail the aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Straits, right? And we're just, every time the Chinese put up resistance to that or try and do something, we push it back. We push back further. The Chinese keep pushing back, right? And so you see what's occurring. The Chinese, start encroaching more on Taiwan, conducting more aviation operations there. We consistently send our aircraft and our ships through the Taiwan Strait, but we also start sending missile systems into the Philippines, right? As well as all the other provocations there, and so this idea of pushing the other guy, thinking they're not going to, and then when you're up against someone like, say, Vladimir Putin, Yahya Sinwar, Nasrallah, why do you think these guys are going to back down? It is quite scary when you realize the operating principles that these nations work under, like the theories that they work under, and then you have to, of course, adjust that for the politics that are involved, because what will ultimately decide is what they think is the best thing domestically for them to do. So it is quite scary. Escalate to de-escalate. Yeah.
Do you think there are any? What do you think the red lines are right now for like a full scale war starting between Israel and Lebanon?
Oh, I think we've passed those. I think for Israel, the main thing is to try and get the U.S. involved into it. The U.S., of course, does not want to be involved in it. This White House is terrified of it. But where it's White House, the dilemma for the White House is that if they do go into this war and it becomes a regional war and gasoline goes to $8 a gallon, Harris isn't winning in November. If they resist and Israel is able to demonstrate, look, Hezbollah just bombed the school, and there's always these dead Israeli children, and AIPAC and the other Israel lobby is saying to the Harris campaign and to the DNC and to the White House, well, I guess we're going to spend this $200 million, what we're going to give to you, we're going to give it to Donald Trump and all the folks, the down ballot on the Republican side. So you see this dilemma that the White House is in, that the Harris campaign, the DNC is in, and they're the ones who put themselves in that dilemma, of course, right? So, but in terms of the red lines, I think it's past that. I mean, I think you have many in Israel want this war. Certainly, it's all in the press. The politicians who are saying it. Minister just said the other day about pushing in there. All the preparations seem to be there. They have been, it's been almost a year since October 7th. They've had the ability to sketch out what they want to do, how they want to do it. The Israeli army is exhausted. The Israeli economy is bleeding out. Politically, Israel is in a the friction, to put it politely, within Israeli politics is incredible. But for the governing coalition, they believe that war doesn't just fulfill their goals, right? That this is a war that they want for both militarist and religious Zionist Greater Israel reasons, but also too, they believe this is politically the smart thing to do. It will solidify their base, which has remained solid with them throughout this last year, and they may pull in others. Right now, I mean, as awful as Netanyahu is, as even though they're getting hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting him, which was occurring before October 7th, we have to remember, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he is still the most popular politician in Israel. I mean, he's not getting more than 32 or 33% in the polling, but that's enough to put him at the top. And we've seen polls, we've seen some stuff that says, like, over the last several months, elections are held today, he stays in power because his base is with him, right? His people are with him. And the same with Smotrich's and Ben Gavir's, and that reactionary right is with him. And so this idea of a war then, they see as a way to stay in power. They also see as a way of possibly ending this plight, because Israel is bleeding out economically. I mean, there's a thing every week. There's another story about Israel, the economy. Last week, it was that $40 billion has left of Israeli investments have left the country, right? So not only you don't have people investing in Israel, you don't have money staying within Israel. People are putting their money out. Other things too. The numbers for tourism, first half of 2024, tourism in Israel was 1/4 of what it was in the first half of 2023. I mean, it's just and on and on and on. We can go through all that, right? It's just the consequences. So do we get this over with, right? If Netanyahu has pledged, he made the fourth goal of the war in Gaza to be the return of Israeli settlers to northern Israel, because they've had 60, 70,000 people not at their homes in Israel, in northern Israel, since October 7th. So, I mean, that has huge political effects, but also huge economic effects. Israel's not that big of a country. To have that many internally displaced people is a problem. I mean, so as well as I think they understand Israel, I mean, I lost track of the retired generals who have been writing and speaking in Israeli media saying, we're killing ourselves here. We're on a suicidal path. We're going to cause our own collapse. We're going to cause our own destruction with this. So Israel's adversaries recognize this, and so they want to play the long game. They want to keep Israel on high alert for as many years as they can. They want to bleed them out. They want to keep the IDF exhausted. They want to economically destroy Israel, right? And they want to see them eat each other alive politically. So, okay, let's not go into that trap. So let's get into this war in Lebanon. And then, of course, you have the reasons for it. You have, if you want to divide this Israeli camp into two sections, which oversimplifies it, but I think it does it in an honest oversimplification. You have the militarists and you have the religious Zionists. And the militarists pushing into Lebanon makes sense. We've got to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River, right? I mean, even though we've tried this twice before, even though the first time we tried it, there was no Hezbollah until we tried it. And then Hezbollah was created because we invaded and occupied, right? And 2006 was a disaster. But third time's a charm, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, you have that militarist side that sees the security benefits, the perceived security benefits of this buffer. And then, of course, you have the Zionists, the Greater Israel, the religious side, who have, if you look at their maps, Israel extends up to the Litani River. So this is just fulfilling this idea of Greater Israel. And if you're not going to do it now, then when are you going to do it? Could you do it under a Trump administration? Possibly. Could you do it under a Harris administration? I don't know. Maybe not. Now you got this lame duck president, and you got the White House's hands are tied because, as I explained before, damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. This may be the best time for them to do it. And for the Lebanese, of course, no time is a good time. Lebanon's economy it's a bankrupt country. in every way you can think of, right? It's got a shell of a government. It's held together by these various factions. The Lebanese economy, I mean, for years you just hear one horror story after another about how difficult it is there, how poor it is there. And, certainly this idea of, we talked about 60,000 Israeli settlers displaced from northern Israel. Well, I just heard before I came on, the Lebanese government is saying 500,000 Lebanese have been displaced from the south of Lebanon in the last few days. That's on top of the 100,000 or so who are already displaced. Lebanon's not that big of a country either. So no time is a good time for Lebanon, despite all of the machismo and the chest pounding coming from the Lebanese, coming from Hezbollah, but is also as well from other factions of Lebanon. The Lebanese army says we will fight alongside Hezbollah. And yeah, sure, you want to bring them in, you want to do what you did to them before, humiliate them, but you also have to remember, 06 wasn't that long, it was 40 days or so, but 82, that went to 2000. That's 18 years of occupation in on top of an already horrible, brutal civil war. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's all this, but the red lines, man, I think the red lines have been crossed, and I think what the issue for the Israelis is now, how do we get Hezbollah to cross a red line of the United States? And there's some speculation that these pager attacks and everything else were meant to incite a response from Hezbollah that would be atrocious, that would be heinous, that would be enough to call the American government up and say, you have to get involved. Because I myself and many others, most I think, don't believe that Israel can win a war against Hezbollah, particularly with all the support that Hezbollah will get from their allies in the region, including ground cadres from Iraq and Syria. And these are all battle-tested, experienced, competent militaries, essentially. I don't think Israel could win that ground war without the help of the United States, particularly particularly the air and missile support it would provide, as well as all the logistics.
So it seems that the red line that Israel is trying to bait Lebanon to cross, or Hezbollah to cross, is really like a strike south of Haifa.
Yeah, I
that's
think
kind of been like the unwritten rule. Like, all right, you can, anything south of Haifa that will warrant, like, potentially U.S. involvement.
If it hits the right thing. If it hits the right thing. If it hits some air base and the Israelis don't talk about what happened or something like that, so be it. If it hits Ben Gurion Airport and explodes a plane full of pilgrims, that's a different story. Yeah, what they need is this shock. They need the October 7th moment, right? They need that type of 9/11 Pearl Harbor type of emotion to get the United States to get involved. And certainly the biggest loser in that, aside from all the people in the region, it would be Ukraine. And this is why I've been asked a couple of times, how come Russia is not more involved in this? How come Russia's not put more pressure on Israel? I think the Russians want to see this thing go along as it goes along. If it gets really bad in Israel, right, and Israel is facing attacks consistently from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria, from Lebanon. Lebanon is receiving support from Turkey, right? Because people will say, well, what's the big deal? The Israeli Air Force is going to interdict anything that comes in from Syria or Iraq. They're already doing that. Well, what's the Turks? And if you watched Erdogan today at the UN, as well as King Abdullah, these men are serious. They're saying we have to take matters into our own hands here. And the things they spoke about, which we can get into later, I've not heard anyone say anything like that before. So, this idea of the Turks then supplying the Lebanese, you now have, from the north, and a rapprochement between the Turks and the Syrians, bring them back to the good graces with each other because of this. All this, well, what does that mean? That means the United States has to send, just as one example, Ukraine's not getting any more Patriot missiles, right? Those all have to go to Israel. We saw that happen already almost a year ago or so. All these 155 artillery shells have been shipped out of Israel to go to Ukraine. I think they were in Poland, and October 7th happens, and the United States sent them all back to Israel. Ukraine has been made very clear to the Ukrainians that Israel is the priority. So if you're looking at this from the Russians' perspective, hey, egg this thing on. Let's get the United States bogged down in this. That's good for us anyway, to have the U.S. bogged down in another Middle Eastern war. You had a friend of mine who years ago went to China, like this is 2010 or so. he met with Chinese diplomats, and he asked them, "What would you like to see the United States do?" And the Chinese diplomat said, "We'd like to see you bogged down in Middle Eastern wars. Keep doing that. That's helping us, right? You know, I mean, so for the Russians, of course, love to see the Americans bogged down in this thing, because there's also that secondary effect of that means Ukraine is not just second fiddle. You know, it doesn't even have a fiddle anymore. You know, because everything is going to support Israel. You know, I mean, so this notion of getting the U.S. to respond is paramount for the Israelis, because again, I don't think they can do it without the help of the U.S. And it certainly, as I've said already, this seems like the best time to do it for them. But don't get me wrong, they're not going to stop trying. They're not going to stop trying.
So what do you think the U.S. would do? Like they would go after what Hezbollah's like long range missile supply?
Yeah, I think it'd be our air and missile forces. I mean, essentially, you could, get to the point where you have a couple of, which would be hard because our Navy's in such terrible shape, and this really shows how exhausted the U.S. military is. How I don't want to call it paper tiger, because it can still bring a tremendous amount of force to bear. But essentially, have a couple of carriers there, have 6 to 10 destroyers, maybe an equivalent number of frigates. 5 or 6 cruisers in the area, handful, 2 or 3 subs. That's a lot of firepower. That's a lot of Tomahawk missiles, a lot of aircraft coming off it. Plus, then all of the U.S. Air Force squadrons in the region, which, the U.S. put more of those squadrons in back in the spring. I'm not sure if they've been relieved. Certainly, the squadrons have been relieved, but I don't know if the numbers have come down. And they're talking about there are 40,000 troops, U.S. troops in the region last week. And as of, yesterday, the Pentagon said that number is going up to about 50,000. So, the amount of firepower and protection that the U.S. can provide air defense-wise, as well as then the air and missile strikes it's able to put onto Hezbollah, it frees up the Israelis to concentrate on other things, to have some peace of mind, some sense of security that it won't be as bad as it could be. But you also have to remember that the Israelis aren't so sure about that. Yemen a week ago got a hypersonic missile into Israel. If we go back to August when tensions were really high before all this, Benjamin Netanyahu spent the better part of 2 weeks in a bunker. So certainly what they're up against in terms of not just the unity of their adversaries, but also the support that their adversaries are potentially getting from those outside the region. Israel has not seen something like this in 50 years. So they do have to tread cautiously. But again, their political instincts, their political desires say this is the best path forward for them, is to pursue this thing. And I just don't see how that changes. I mean, certainly you've got another year into Israeli elections. I just don't see how this government doesn't keep trying to accomplish it. Maybe they won't do a ground invasion because that does seem so foolhardy, but certainly trying to bait, as you were saying, Henry, Hezbollah to do something that would be so dastardly the U.S. had to get involved. I think that's, and whether or not Israel actually wants a war with Iran, I don't know. I mean, that seems so ridiculous, so foolish. But at the same time, too, you have to remember a key part of Israeli warfighting, a key part of the Israeli system is punishment. And so the idea wouldn't be that Israel would go to war with Iran in order to cause regime change. I mean, they'd be talking about that in the press and everything, but I can't imagine anyone would think that would actually happen. But the idea would be to punish Iran, to mete out that punishment, right? To give them what they deserve, right? As well as to reinforce Israel's image of, you don't mess with us, the iron wall again, So the problem is, I just don't see how any of this ends. And the same with Gaza, the same with the West Bank. I don't see how any of this ends. I don't care if it's Trump or Harris in the White House. This only ends when the Israelis want it to end. Unless, of course, and this is what we heard today at the UN from Erdogan and Abdullah, force is put on them, in the sense of actual force, which was, I don't know if I read too much into what they said, but certainly that's what came across to me, is that, the UN system has failed. The world political order is a joke. This whole thing is rotten. We've been watching this genocide occur for almost a year now. We have to do something ourselves. And Erdogan spoke. What Erdogan said was, he said, 80 years ago, an alliance for humanity came together to stop Hitler. We need an alliance for humanity to come together now to stop Netanyahu and his murder network. Then he goes on to talk about the UN Act of Unity for Peace, which is what was used, say, in 1950 to authorize a United Nations military force in Korea, right? So this idea that he's saying this clearly, and the same with Abdullah. He talks about establishing a protective mechanism within Palestine to protect the Palestinians from the Israelis. He also talks about enforcing a humanitarian corridor into Palestine. I mean, you start looking at these things, kind of some of what the Iranians had said. You start realizing that maybe these guys really are starting to think about, we have to do something on our own. History will judge us. Our people will judge us. And Erdogan runs his mouth a lot. But the fact that Abdullah is saying this, you're seeing this from the Iranians as well, although the Iranians certainly are offering an olive branch. But as well. But you have this coalition already. You have this allied army already of Yemen, Iraq, Syria, battle tested, competent, able to fight. So potentially this unthinkable thing could occur. And we have to be reminded all throughout history, right, guys? You guys do this podcast on history. The unthinkable happens all the time.
Yeah. Doesn't that create a substantial risk of a 6-day war repeat where, okay, all of these people running their mouths against Israel puts Israel on on an offensive footing rather than a defensive footing, and then they start doing strikes in a lot of these regions. I could see that as being the case. I mean, already you see them striking deep within territories that have nothing to do with the Gaza war, but adjacent to the Gaza war, right? Whether it's blowing up Iranian buildings, to get top Gaza people, or hitting people deep in Lebanon or Syria for the same reasons, right? So they've been crossing a lot of lines preemptively. Don't you think that all this talk that these countries are having, specifically Erdogan, could you imagine Israel striking that's Turkey in advance, right? Just because they think that they might be gearing up and ready to go,
Yeah, exactly, Danny. And that's the trepidation here. That's the fear that holds, particularly, say, Turkey back. Why haven't the Turks put F-16s over Beirut yet? Why haven't they sent some of their S-400s to Hezbollah? Who knows? Maybe they have already. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it. There's two things, and this is why what I'm saying may not occur now, but it may occur in a year or 5 years from now. We may just be in the very opening chapter of this. The example I've been using is people refer to the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, which were massive, horrible, million and a half people killed, terrible atrocities. The world had never seen anything like it at the time, right? And then 1914 comes, right? I mean, so we're just in the beginning stages of something as God help us, forgive me for saying this, where the genocide in Gaza is just the first few pages of the book. I mean, that type of what's to come. And so it may be next week, it may be 6 months from now, maybe 5 years from now, in the sense of this resistance of this. One, you have the people in place who want to be the modern Saladin, right? Certainly you listen to Erdogan, you hear that, but you also have this understanding that the timing is not right. So couching everything I said before with this understanding that what's holding the Turks back right now? Turks have the second largest army in NATO, right? Why aren't they just marching south? Why hasn't Erdogan called up Assad and said, I'm marching my army through Syria into Lebanon? Well, two things. One, it's still up against the United States empire. And as much as the U.S. is in decline, as much as our military is exhausted and on, we still can bring a tremendous amount of force to bear. But it's in decline. And so you certainly see, say, with Turkey, and I feel like I should be saying, Turkey A. I feel like I'm always saying that wrong, like the actual pronounce it, right? So I'll just say the Turks. I'll just say the Turks. So you see with the Turks, a couple of weeks ago, we're going to join BRICS, right? This idea of we're going to build alliances where we can stand up to the American empire because we have these people behind us, and that might take time. The other thing too is Israelis have nuclear weapons, and that is a prime thing here that we can't ever not. We always have to discuss. So for the Turks, it's Gaza, the West Bank, southern Lebanon. Are they important enough to lose Ankara to a nuclear weapon? Because if anyone thinks that the Israelis wouldn't use a nuclear weapon after everything we have seen, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, like, so that type of thing. So this way it goes back to the long game. So certainly, what I could envision is if Israel goes into Lebanon, you have support coming from Iraq and from Syria, just as Hezbollah went into Syria to support the Syrian government. You have those cadres coming over, those popular mobilization forces coming in to help in the south. God help us, you could also have a weaponization, a utilization of the Islamic State, Sunni type extremist groups to assist as well. I know there's a lot of discussion about the alignment between ISIS and Israel and the West and all that, and I understand all that, but certainly it's not hard to utilize those forces in a way and to rejigger those forces in a way against Israel. So God help us in that sense, world to see that type of thing. But then, this idea that it becomes now this missile strikes from Yemen, missile strikes from Iran, missile strikes from Iraq, from Syria, from northern Lebanon, constantly into Israel, right? And this goes on 6 months, it goes on a year, it goes on 2 years. There hasn't been a bus full of Christian tourists from Missouri in Jerusalem in 2.5 years now, kind of thing. That type of, we're going to wear them down this way. And, then of course, you have to go back. All this stuff is connected, right? You have to go back 6-7 months now. Vladimir Putin saying, look, if you keep pushing us, we're going to start sending weapons and missile systems and parts of kit and other things to your adversaries around the world. So we start seeing some of the more advanced Russian stuff in the hands of the Yemenis, right? That type of thing. And now you've got a U.S. frigate sinking in the Red Sea. And on it goes like that. And that's the idea, I think, behind an Axis of Resistance long-term war plan against Israel. Incredibly, and again, caveating that with Mike, oh shoot, why am I blanking on this? The boxer with the tattoo on his face.
Mike Tyson.
Mike
Tyson. Thank you. Mike Tyson's saying everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right? So that you can imagine that would be like what the Axis of Resistance could envision as a way to draw this out, to exhaust Israel, to continue to exhaust the U.S., to bring more support to their side, right? And you're also seeing within the Middle East, I think, that this separation, right, between nations, particularly along the monarchy, non-monarchy axis, right? So the Persian Gulf monarchies. Is this a way then in a war like this that you start to get dissension, you start to get hostility in those Gulf monarchies, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, etc., within Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that causes problems for the American presence, right? So they start doing that as well, as to undermine their rivals in the monarchies of the Gulf, because the people are witnessing this war against Israel, and they see their government allowing the United States to have their air bases and their Patriot missile systems here and everything else. So you can kind of see how you could game this out, with the caveat of once you get punched in the face, though, it all goes to pot, or it can all go to pot. But yeah.
Seems like a lot of really conflicting alliance systems. It's very reminiscent of World War I, because I'm thinking about how we've been talking about Lebanon, and specifically when we're talking about Lebanon, we keep bringing up Hezbollah.
Yeah.
But we're always forgetting that Lebanon has a whole actual army, right? And that army has like military ties with the US, right? Like we're technically on paper allies, right?
They do. And supposedly we have our special operations guys there with them.
Exactly.
The 527 program is supposedly active in Lebanon. And,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. So
and then Turkey is NATO, right?
Right.
So
exactly.
Like,
yep.
What is going on here, right?
Yeah.
Like who do we support if, let's say, God forbid, there is a conflict? Who cares who starts it? A conflict between Turkey and Israel as a result of this. Do we back, do we do the Article 5 for NATO? or do we back our longstanding, Israeli non-NATO member?
Oh, I mean, it's no question we'll support Israel. I mean, that's no question. That's
But
not
that's
even.
pretty contradictory, wouldn't you
Oh,
say?
completely
Doesn't that
contradictory. Yeah.
now
Yeah,
that starts to
absolutely.
unravel at the fabric of NATO in general,
Well,
right?
I think Turkey leaves NATO then, and I think that's what's coming anyway. I think the Turks are going to leave NATO in the next 10 years or so, maybe longer. Particularly as NATO, particularly as NATO finds its purpose around the globe, becoming a global force, it's going to become more and more at odds with Turkey's interests, right? Particularly their economic interests, but also their cultural and religious and ethnic interests as well. So I think you're going to see that, as well as if this is what I tweeted today after watching President Biden at the UN. If nations are not on the wait list for BRICS, they're going to be after watching this speech today by the President of the United States at the UN. I mean, certainly if you have, this decision to make between going along with the American empire, everything you know about it, how it's going to act, how you can't predict how it's going to act, right? How it's a danger to everyone around you. Go back to Kissinger's quote, to be America's enemy is dangerous, to be its ally is deadly. Understanding that, and you see this BRICS developing, why wouldn't you go with them? Why do everything you can to get away from the American empire, to get out from underneath its foot, escape its hegemony? Turkey, of course, but Turkey, that gets back to your point, Danny. Turkey's incredibly complicated. It's always been incredibly complicated. It's got one foot in both Europe and Asia. That's the way, I mean, I mean, it is. It's not as simple as I'm probably, stating here. But, you try and, and I'll caveat what I'm going to say with Yogi Berra. Predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future. So as you're trying to figure out, in the sense of what's the best way to go forward here, what do you think is going to go forward, and what would you do? Yeah, you're trying to weigh all these things, and for me, it comes back to what's best then for Erdogan and the Turks domestic politically, right? And certainly, I think that the Turks are, that interest in Turkey to be a major power again, to matter, to not be seen as a sidekick of the United States. That pressure is growing, right? I think also, too, the untapped potential of Turkey, the promises of Turkey. I've heard this for decades now. I remember going to see George Friedman of Stratfor speak back in 2005, I think it was. And he talked about which nations are going to be the powerhouse nations in 2025. I think it was about that, about 25 years out, 2030 or something like that. And I think he said Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey, right? Mexico, of course, maybe that couldn't have been possible if it hadn't been completely destroyed by this war on drugs. But Indonesia, I don't know enough about to know why or where they're at. But certainly Turkey, yeah, okay, maybe that's moving along. Maybe Friedman was right. Maybe he's off by
1 out of
5 years.
3, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's hey, if I mean that gets you into the Hall of Fame in baseball.
Yeah, right. Seriously.
So yeah.
What's wild is that 5 years ago, Turkey and Hezbollah were essentially at war.
Yes.
Turkey was funding proxies in Syria that were directly fighting Hezbollah in Syria. So it's so interesting that Israel has managed to unite many of its neighbors against them, when just 5 to 10 years ago, the whole Sunni Shia war was going on. Now that seems to be on the back burner. Another thing that I'm curious to hear about, or at least your opinion on, is that I feel like since this, new phase of this war has begun, the war in Gaza, or specifically, you don't hear as much about Hamas on the news. You don't really hear like, oh, Hamas this. It's all Hezbollah and Iran. But you have to imagine that, and I've not seen any statistics on this. I haven't seen any numbers on this, so I have no idea. But I would imagine that Hamas still exists. And with all the destruction in Gaza and all the hopelessness, that they have a lot of fresh recruits.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of people who are seeking revenge. So for them to engage with Hezbollah in the north and still have this Hamas problem in Gaza and potentially it extending into the West Bank, I don't know how they could manage a two-front war and occupying and fighting the insurgency, within its occupied territories and also fighting like a full-on war with Hezbollah. It seems like there's just no way out for them, and they don't have what they need is a visionary leader, really, who can navigate them out of this. But it doesn't seem like that visionary leader is stepping up anytime soon. They needed like a Yitzhak Rabin type character, and unfortunately,
they killed the last Yitzhak Rabin.
Yeah,
a Benjamin Netanyahu fan killed him.
Yeah,
yeah.
750,000 armed settlers would murder him. Yeah,
yeah. So it's, I'm of the opinion. I speak to my friend, my friend Jose Nino, who's a geopolitical analyst, and he's of the opinion, and I agree with him that Israel's going to be a failed state before its 100-year anniversary, and it's hard to like even deny it with the looking at the trajectory that they're on. Not even just like the military, like the military conundrum that they're in, but they have all sorts of problems with their economy, with like you had said,
demographics.
They have all sorts of problems with their demographics, with this growing what they call ultra orthodox, and I'm not even sure if that's the right term for them, but it's what they're universally called, the ultra orthodox, who many of them live on the state. A lot of them don't. I have a friend who is like a hardcore Zionist, and he just says nothing but bad things about like the ultra orthodox. He's like, oh, they don't want to fight in the military, they're pussies,
right? Yeah,
all they want to do is read Torah all day. And it's like you have this, and you saw this play out in all these huge protests that happened just which seems like a decade ago, but they only happened 18 months ago. These huge protests over
they were going on. Yeah,
overreach.
They started about then 18 months ago, and they were going up until October 7th. Oh yeah.
So what I'm extremely fearful of, and you said this earlier, is that everyone knows that they have something called the Samson option,
right?
And if they reach a breaking point, like if they reach a point where their economy is broken, they're militarily they're failing, their standards of living are decreasing. It seems like the best case scenario is people just immigrate out, and they're like, you know what? It's better to live in New York City. it's better to live in London. It's better to live in Argentina or something than to live on this, because it seems like a lot of people are gonna want to find a way out. Also, not to mention, you can't even buy Israeli products anymore because they might have a bomb in it.
I know, right? I mean,
it's like so it's
I mean, certainly the immigration is thing. We don't have good numbers on that. You see 60,000 to a couple 100,000 have left Israel over the last couple of years, particularly after October 7th. The Israeli government doesn't keep track of this, so we don't really have a good number of it. We have an idea, though. It's large, though. And again, the Israeli population, the Israeli Jewish population is 8 million. I mean, so if it's 50,000, 60,000 have emigrated in the last year, that's a lot. It's a lot of people. And they come from the secular left. Those are the ones who are leaving. And they're going to live with their cousins in LA because they're a diaspora population. They have relatives all around the world that they can go to. So, right, it's not as daunting as a fact like, getting on a ship, not knowing who's going to be at the port when you show up. No, your cousin, your cousins Jonathan and Julia are going to meet you there. I mean, so
they've got great visa arrangements with a lot of countries too. So that the process of getting in and being there legally ad infinitum is pretty easy, especially in the U.S.
That's absolutely the case. That's absolutely the case. I think, to back it up, I think what the best case for this Israeli government is that they proceed with some of the plans they have for Gaza, including this general's plan, which is the idea of pushing the Gazans, the Palestinians in Gaza, south of the Netzarim corridor. The Netzarim corridor is a corridor that runs east-west about 2/3 of the way up the Gaza Strip, pushing everyone down there below that, and containing the problem, and then just having basically a redux of what's occurred for the 15 years prior to October 7th. Just do it better this time, right? And this fantastical belief that somehow you're going to squash the resistance. Remember, we don't even really know we can't trust anything these guys say out loud. Remember, go back to March. Netanyahu, when the Israeli army was about to go into Rafah, the last city that they hadn't physically occupied and destroyed. And Netanyahu's going on about we have to go in there because there are 24 battalions of Hamas fighters. We've destroyed 21. There's only 3 left. We're going to wrap this thing up by St. Patrick's Day. And yeah, I mean, so that type of we don't even really know what these people believe, other than they're really good at telling their loyal audiences, their supporters, including in the West, particularly in Britain, the U.S., and particularly in American media and American political circles, what they need to hear to continue to support. So I think, but the best case for the Israelis would be able to contain Gaza, and then carry out this type of war in Lebanon that ceases the attacks in northern Israel, and then Netanyahu gets reelected next October. That's, I think, their best case. I think it's got a chance, the odds of succeeding about as good as, me getting a date with Scarlett Johansson. Like that kind of thing, right? It's nice. It's pretty to think about, but it's probably not going to happen. So, this idea then you get to of a collapsed state, though, on the other end of that, the worst case, that's a terrifying thought, Henry. That's a terrifying thought. A collapsed state with nuclear weapons, a theocracy, a collapsed theocratic state with nuclear weapons. You have where this can go. And this is why I'm very critical and very upset with Joe Biden and his administration. They have put us in this place. What are the likely outcomes? What's the most likely outcome? What's the worst outcome? The worst outcome is something that the retired Israeli generals are warning about. Ronen Bar, who's the head of the Israeli Shin Bet, roughly the equivalent of the American FBI. He wrote a letter to the prime minister and his cabinet saying, hey, look, I'm the head of your security service here, your internal security service. And I'm telling you, the biggest threat we have in Israel right now is not Iran. It's not Hezbollah. It's not Hamas. It's Jewish terrorism. It's the settlers. That's the biggest threat we have. And so you talk about these 750,000 Israelis on the streets protesting against Netanyahu and his government. Well, you know who's looking at them? 750,000 armed settlers who view those people as traitors, as religious traitors, as faith traitors, as betrayers of the destiny of Israel, right? So the powder keg that exists there is tremendous. And if I can envision an Israel 5 or 10 years from now that hasn't collapsed because the United States is behind it, our treasury is just sending money. Again, bad news for Ukraine, because at some point the American Congress will say, you know what? We're not doing another $75 billion for Ukraine because we're giving $40 billion a year to Israel. We're just not going to do this anymore, guys. Sorry. Ukraine, go ahead and stand up a lobby like the Israelis have, and maybe you'll be better off next time, which is something that's occurring. There's a really terrific piece in Harper's by Andrew Coburn on the Hindu lobby, which I really encourage people to read, because that's exactly what Indian Americans are doing, modeling on the success of the Israel lobby. And we're going to see more of that because we have a system of legalized bribery here. So why wouldn't they? But this idea, right, of a collapse in Israel, worst case, a civil war that causes, you got a failed theocratic state with nuclear weapons. My God, the Palestinians, of course, suffer constantly. There is no good outcome in this at all for the Palestinians. The best outcome for the Palestinians is in a year, elections where you have a Benny Gantz or a Yair Lapid who basically turn the dial back, bring the calendar back to October 6th. That's the best situation the Palestinians are going to get. And so this idea we can envision is of an Israel where you've had this immigration, you've had economic collapse, this bleeding out that goes on. It's in a constant state of warfare where its neighbors. The United States is heavily invested militarily and also financially, keeping it afloat. And the Israeli political system resembles the Taliban, where they just don't care about the rest of the world. They couldn't care less about what anyone else in the world says. Kick them out of the UN. They don't care. They've got the American Treasury behind them. They got the American Congress behind them. Elect Bernie Sanders or Medea Benjamin or someone like that as president. The American Congress will impeach them, right? I mean, so they've got that type of look at everyone is gaga. Oh, Bernie Sanders is going to promote this resolution that's going to cause the Congress to have to debate arms sales to Israel. Well, first of all, from what I understand, Sanders isn't introducing this until after the American elections. So I guess the not this would have any effect, but I guess 6 more weeks of Palestinians being murdered in a genocide, that's just good politics for Sanders. But anyway, and there's no chance of success. They'll get how many votes in the Senate? 5, 6? It won't pass the House. The House, it'll be 410 to 25. If that. I mean, so like there's that's what we're looking at in the sense of, okay, is that what it looks like for Israel in the future? And that's what the United States is tied to. Fortress Israel, with its political leadership that only cares about its own principles, its own beliefs, its own place in the world. Again, in a similar way, the Afghan Taliban are, where we don't care if our people starve. It's more important to us that our women aren't allowed to show any of their face than it is for our people to eat. Right? I mean, that type of mindset, is that who would be in control of Israel in 5, 10, 15 years from now?
It seems that I don't know what scenario is worse for the Palestinians or just Israel's neighbors, a Trump presidency or, a continued Biden-Harris administration. Because on one hand, it seems like the Democrats are just a little bit more lukewarm about the relationship with Israel. I mean, they support it. I'm not saying they don't support it. And they make up these really, really pathetic stories about how, like, oh, yeah, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors when we speak to Netanyahu. Netanyahu came and Joe Biden called him an asshole. Can you believe that? And it's like, exactly. I can't imagine any universe. Like, that story is more likely, that's less likely than, the Jets winning the Super Bowl this year. It's the think that Joe Biden stood up to Netanyahu is just I refuse to believe it.
Here's the deal.
Seems to be like a completely. It's like, come on, man. Like,
come on, Jack.
Stop.
Cut the malarkey.
So on one hand, but the advantage for the Israelis is that they get this kind of cover to some degree.
Yeah.
It's like, the Democrats are kind of standing up to them, but it's like all fake, and the red lines don't exist. Any red line that they said did exist. The Israelis just completely flew by. But on the other hand, the Republican Party is just so fanatical. Like it's fanaticism when it comes to their support of Israel. And I always say this is that when the Israel lobby tells the Democrats to jump, they say how high. When they say it to the Republicans, they say off what. It's like it's insane. If you go to like a GOP rally, it's like just nonstop. Like, oh, Israel's our greatest ally. We need to support Israel. They're all Hamas. They were, I forgot which senator it was. Someone was calling Chuck Schumer a Hamas supporter.
Yeah.
Donald Trump just called him a Palestinian the other day. Yeah. Like it's some type of pejorative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But and Israel's working really hard to change that within the Democratic Party. I mean, they took, they beat down Cory Bush and Jamal Bowman with $20 million. They're happy to do it kind of thing. Look how they have cowed AOC. I mean, it's pathetic who that person is. How her response to all this has been just absolutely, but she is scared to death. Because she knows that with enough money, she could lose in her district, right? As protected as you think, if you think of anyone in the U.S. system who's protected by the gerrymandering and everything else, well, we'll just include somehow, we'll put Westchester County in AOC's district. We'll just skip over the Bronx and Manhattan and we'll have Queens with Westchester. We could do that. Or parts of Long Island. Actually, that's what you do. Put her into Long Island and she'll lose. She knows that. So their ability to make the Democratic Party more like the Republicans is growing. And I think the question of which would be better, it all depends on how much theater you want, man. Do you want to hear Chuck Schumer talk about how, in the weeks before the U.S. primaries, how Benjamin Netanyahu has to go, which is totally just a dramatic piece of rhetoric meant to try and heal some of the uncommitted concerns within the Democratic Party, in the primaries, and we had all that, which the Democratic Party, the DNC, has shown us what they really think of all that. They think, because they know that if we pay enough lip service to this, we say enough things, if we get AOC at the convention to say they are working tirelessly to bring about a ceasefire, enough people will say, that's enough for me, I'm voting for Harris, right? And so now, rather than losing 6 million votes because of this genocide, we're only going to lose 4.5 million votes. And that is well worth it compared to losing all the money from the Israel lobby, because that's a certainty. If we lose that Israeli lobby support, we're not winning. That's certain. So that's the calculations. On the other side, of course, under a Trump administration, it's grotesque. I have heard now a couple of times where Miriam Alderson's asked, Miriam Alderson being the widow of Sheldon. Yeah, it's Sheldon Adelson, of course. If we go back to 2015, Trump is saying things about Israel and Palestine that just nobody would believe. In the sense that he when he first starts running, he says things about we need to be more neutral in this. We need to be a better arbitrator. The Palestinians have gotten bad deals on this, right? And then he starts doing well in the primaries. The Israeli money starts coming in. And then he gets a visit with Sheldon Adelson. And all of a sudden, he has always loved Israel, right? I am the greatest American to ever stand for Israel, on and on. The ask then, of course, was, hey, Donald, I'll give you all this money if you move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And they do it. And Adelson dies. And his wife Miriam is now, of course, but she was always there with him. We shouldn't really describe it as like she's the widow who inherited this. She was side by side with him.
Just living out her husband's wishes.
That's right.
For a greater Israel, right?
The dutiful widow, like that thing. But so the ask, as I've heard, is that the same type of thing, $100 million or whatever they'll put into this race or are putting into this race. The ask is the annexation of the West Bank. And that's not, I don't
to completely annex the West Bank.
Yeah, I believe that. Look at when whether it was the move of the embassy, but more importantly, the annexation of the Golan Heights, which clear, right? The United States just went along without it under the Trump administration.
As bad as Golan Heights was, I can see the strategic implications of that, but just the fallout from trying to annex the West Bank, I think would be
massive,
way worse than just moving the embassy.
But for the Israelis, what's more important, having to slaughter more Palestinians, right? Or getting, realizing the promise of bringing Judea and Samaria, as they call it, into Israel. Yeah, absolute mess. I can't imagine it, but this is what. And this is, of course, what's coming from an Israeli American and others here. But there are certainly those in Israel who want to annex. I was going to say about the Golan Heights is that in the Golan Heights, when it actually does come up in the American media, such as when those Druze children were killed by that rocket several months ago, 12 of them killed playing soccer. There's nothing on CNN or the Washington Post, as far as I saw, that actually explained what the Golan Heights were. And those Druze children, most of the Druze in the Golan Heights have rejected Israeli citizenship. That didn't matter to the American press. The American press prescribed them as Israeli Druze children, right? Sometimes they didn't even put Druze in there. They just put Israeli children. Mm-hmm. Most of the time they said Israeli Druze without even considering that this is an illegally annexed, occupied territory who has faced ethnic cleansing, because there's not that many people that live in the Golan Heights because many of them have been kicked out or they had to flee. And those that are there, the vast majority of them, screw you, Israel. We're not a citizen, that kind of thing. So you just see the way the American press is just, yeah, sure. First couple of years of the annexation, it'll be rough in the American press. Maybe you might have some people talking about it, but give it 5 years and it'll just be a fait accompli. And, it's just part of Israel now.
5 years, 5 months. Our media cycle is just We forget about
Yeah,
things
Well,
really
I think
know,
quickly.
man.
I
Yeah.
think with the Trump presidency, if they allowed them to annex the West Bank, or if they, let's just say, they got all on board for a war with Lebanon, then I think there would be greater resistance. You know, if you thought the college protests this year were bad, I think they would have been way worse with the Trump presidency. Like they would have been like the Summer of Floyd type thing. You know, these protests would have been wild because not only is it, you know, an awful genocide, but it's Trump
Yeah.
who stands for all things evil in the world. So, I mean, that would have just, I think, heightened the tension of those protests. And it would have further it would probably further polarize. I mean, we're already so polarized, but it would further polarize the right wing's main identity as being the pro-Israel party. But you are seeing a level of you're not seeing the same level of enthusiasm from the American right towards Israel than you probably seen maybe 10 years ago. I come from like a very conservative Republican family, and I was just talking to my mom, and my mom always grew up to think like, you know, Israel's our friends. They're good friends of us, you know. I have a funny story because I grew up, my neighbor growing up was he was Palestinian. His mom was a Palestinian Christian, and they immigrated. The dad was was a white guy from the U.S. But one time I was over, and they were telling me that, you know, like, oh, like, you know, the Israelis stole our land. And I went back and I told my mother, and I'm like, oh, you're like, can you believe that they said that the Israelis stole their land? That's crazy, right? And my mom's like, yeah, don't ever listen to them about that. They don't know what they're talking about. And now, you know, my mom, maybe through my influence, was like, I don't, they don't have the right to do it. This is horrible. Like
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, so you are seeing I think you're seeing a turn. You're seeing a lot of people on the right take it way too far in the wrong direction too, where they're just like collectively condemning Jews. But in some sense, I think those people are actually, you know, they're serving this, you know, they're serving, you know, the Zionist state by doing that, because, you know, the whole purpose of Zionism is that the world is a dangerous place for Jews, and we need a state to, you know, protect us. Yeah. So these people who go like, oh yeah, like, you know, they're starting to praise Hitler and stuff, and you know, equating all evils in the world to Jews. You know, they're actually, you know, bolstering their support, because they're like, well, you see, like, there's all these new anti-Semites, so Israel needs to exist.
Yeah, I think the political calculation is that as long as it's not American troops being killed, Americans won't vote on it. That it will be issue number 7 or 8 for them, and they'll vote on whatever else. And you see that within the Democratic Party. Certainly, Democratic Party, Cato Institute did a study 2 weeks ago. Swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and what would be the third one? Wisconsin, I guess. And anyway, a poll out there, and it showed that majority of Americans are not backing Israel. Majority of Americans want to see U.S. weapons not going to Israel. Among the Democrats, it's 90% of Democrats in those 3 key swing states are saying that we want a ceasefire. 75% of Democrats in those key swing states are saying that we want to see an end to U.S. weapon sales, or U.S. weapon sales conditioned on a ceasefire. And when they ask them, does this make you, if Kamala Harris was to say, I am going to stop sending weapons to Israel, does that make you more likely or less likely to vote for her? They say it's more likely. So, but the problem is, and I learned this from Grover Norquist. When I did my Afghanistan study group like 15 years ago, we had a big tent in D.C., just really pushing to end the war in Afghanistan. We brought in people from all over. One of them was Grover Norquist. We got Grover Norquist and his, you know, Americans for Tax Reform on our side, because we went and talked to him. This was 2010. And we said, you know, Mr. Norquist, do you know how much we're going to spend on the Afghan war this year? He said, no. I said, $120 billion. And he like fell out of his chair, you know? And when he got back up off the floor, he's like with us. But Norquist told me this story told us this story, which I've always come back to. This idea that when he was young and part of the Reagan Revolution, and this must have been maybe the 82 midterms, school prayer was dynamite. 90% of Americans were in favor of school prayer, right? Who's not? Oh, yeah, of course a kid should be able to pray in school. What are you, communist? Like that kind of thing. I mean, the numbers were off the charts in terms of how popular the idea was. And they ran races across the country focusing on school prayer. And they lost on that issue. Because the reality is like, yeah, sure, of course people want kids to pray in school or be able to pray in school. But that's issue like number 9, man. My brother lost his job. Inflation, on and on and on and on. So that I think is the calculation that they come back to, is that even if they are saying this, are they going to vote on it? I mean, the poll that came out last week from the Council of American Islamic Relations, on the left where I'm at with the Green Party and everything, they're all excited because it shows that actually a majority of Muslim voters, and I think it was in Michigan, are going to vote for Stein over Harris. And but it wasn't by much. And so even among the American Muslim community, you still have a huge swath that is going to vote for Harris. So this idea that because something has 70, 80, 90% support, and remember, you guys probably know this better than I do. What are the poll ratings on Medicare for All? What are the poll ratings on background checks for guns?
Pretty good.
I mean, off the charts kind of thing. And they can't do anything about it because our system is insulated with money. Mm-hmm. The only thing that matters, the only thing that's affecting power right now is money. That's it. It's terrible to realize that and everything, to understand it, the implications of it, but money is what matters. And that's, I think, this idea of that if the United States is tied into this war with Israel, the United States certainly is not going to send ground troops over there unless there is the possibility of an Arab invasion like in 73 or something like that, which I don't think there's that possibility. Maybe incursions into the north from Lebanon if they bring in the Syrians and Iraqis to help them, possibly, but I don't think so. But this idea then is it's just going to be, U.S. aircraft, U.S. ships, missiles and bombs, like we've been doing throughout the world, since particularly the second administration of Barack Obama. This idea that Americans won't notice if casualties are not coming home. If casualties start coming home, we have all the data on this. The huge political cost. Foreign wars have huge political costs in the United States if American kids are killed. The 2006 elections, Iraq is the primary thing that voters are voting on. Also, too, the Republican corruption was a pretty big deal. But Iraq, in 2008, Barack Obama defeats Hillary Clinton. He defeats John McCain, the war hero, because of Iraq. 2010, you've got 10 million Americans losing their homes. But also Barack Obama has said about Afghanistan, which is incredibly unpopular. He said, we're getting out. 2012 comes along. You're talking about over 70% of Americans at that point are saying the Afghan war is a mistake. We need to get out. And Obama said, yeah, we are getting out. We started getting out already. And Romney says, I'm with him on that, right? And so it doesn't become the issue. The Democrats are very adept in making it not an issue. And again, you still have the Great Recession, 10 million Americans losing their homes and everything else. Somehow Obama is able to navigate through that as well. So, I mean, the calculations here politically, what we've seen evidence-wise and what we know of the American political system of legalized bribery, that means that you could have the United States spending $20-30 billion in direct aid to Israel every year, our ships and aircraft firing missiles and bombs as fast as we can make them, and the American people not supportive of it, but not noticing it, not caring enough to actually vote on it. And I think that's the calculation that they have in mind to keep this thing going if it gets to that point. The issue would be if the American people start feeling a cost. And this is when you hear someone like Lindsey Graham talking about we've got to bomb the Iranian oil facilities. Well, that would deliver $7 to $8 a gallon gasoline overnight. That would cause a world recession that people would then vote on. So for the Americans, then it's okay, we got to keep the Israelis on a leash here and not let this go too far. So how do we contain this war? And now you get to the point where now you guys with your history, right? It's like, All right, so now you've got, these guys in Washington, D.C. who think they can control war. They think that they are masters of this superhuman force of war. They don't understand why Mars was the strongest god in the Roman pantheon.
Mm-hmm.
Why did the Romans sacrifice bulls to Mars and everyone else got chickens and doves and pigs?
Right.
This idea of thinking that you can control war. Oh my God. But I think that's who we have there. We have people who, going back to what we talked about earlier, believe in escalate to de-escalate, and they believe in their own prowess. And they also, so yeah, I think it's we're not in a good place, guys. We're not in a good place.
Yeah. People are not foreign policy voters.
They're not.
That's usually, it's like issue 7 or 8, and just like you said, like, when soldiers aren't dying or U.S. troops aren't dying, it's in the background. People don't really care.
Now there's actually some really great information on how the Iraq War still affected 2016. That people still voted against Hillary Clinton because of the Iraq War. And they have studies from Harvard and University of Minnesota that showed that in counties that Donald Trump won, that puts him over the top. Those counties, particularly in Midwest Rust Belt parts of the country, were counties that had disproportionately high casualties from the Iraq and Afghan wars. And the study's assumption is that people actually voted on that because they saw Hillary Clinton as being responsible for it, and they're going to hold her to that. It certainly can have that effect. But I think both parties understand that now, and as much as they are war parties, they also have to protect their domestic political interests first and foremost. And so this is why, particularly again, since the second Obama administration, you have seen the United States shift to proxy war or to secret war, right? So, Cost of Wars project at Brown University, they put out a thing every year, where the United States is engaged militarily. And it's like, we're conducting counterterrorism operations in like 80 countries around the world. And the more startling thing is that in the 3 years of the Biden administration, if you went to Congress and asked, everyone in Congress, name all the countries that the United States troops have been involved in combat in the last 3 years, it comes up to potentially 12 countries. There's no one in Congress is going to get that right, and certainly American people don't know. But if you keep it hidden, if it's just special ops, JSOC guys, CIA, more likely contractors, mercenaries, and then our proxies. And if your warfare is classified by the nature of it, if you're using drones and everything within our drone programs is inherently classified, and they can't talk about it. They've actually got a duty. U.S. government officials have a duty to lie about it. To not talk about it, right? So that's the American way of war for the last 12 years now. So, they saw it in Libya, you saw it in Syria, Yemen, so forth, seeing it pretty much in Ukraine. And I think that's how they would fight the war with Israel. The biggest thing for Israel, of course, would be the manpower, so they've got all their reservists called up full time. Their economy tanks even further. So you just got to have mass billions upon billions of American dollars being injected in the Israeli economy to keep it afloat, and we can do that. Sure, we can do. We spent how much did we spend on Iraq and Afghanistan? Trillions of dollars. We've spent more than $1 trillion in interest payments alone for those wars so far. We could spend tens of billions of dollars on Israel. We spent $175 billion on Ukraine so far. So yeah. But
yeah, I guess in perspective, like, our aid to Israel is really not that, like, our yearly aid spigot to Israel is really not that much in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Compared to all the other money that we spend. It's wild. It's all fun and games until your phone explodes.
Right.
Until you're on your Peloton bike and it blows up.
Yeah, it is. That's yeah.
How many devices do you think exist out in the world right now that have these Israeli bombs that have not yet been exploded?
I don't. So backholding was the name of that. BAC was the name of that. How many other front companies did they have?
I don't know.
So, right? That'd be the whole thing. Certainly, if you've got an Apollo Gold, you've thrown that thing in your, your fish tank or something like that, right?
Yeah,
At this
seriously.
point, right? You've gotten away, trying to flush it down the toilet or whatever, and but like how many? But the Israelis wouldn't just use one front company, particularly knowing that if they had designs to use this otherwise, it would have to go, to reach other adversaries. They'd have to have other companies, wouldn't they? And so exactly, and that's certainly an act of terror right there, and certainly
Just the not knowing, right?
just the not knowing. I mean, it's essential. I mean, it's an essential violation of international law. This idea of disguising explosives and as civilian devices. Yeah, I mean that's a clear violation of international law and the laws of armed conflict. The Israelis couldn't care less about that. And again, you get back to this idea, this motif, this belief within the Israeli way of war of punishment is just as important as anything else. Certainly that's the way to do it. You see that whether it's in their open warfare, whether it's in their occupation, certainly in its genocide, in the way it conducts itself politically, right? We're going to terrorize. You don't vote for us in the House of Representatives, we're going to terrorize you. If New York Times, if you run a story that we don't like we are going to terrorize you in a sense of how much heat we're going to put on your editors, your owners, everything else. Right. And so this is why this is very successful. Why does Israel do so well in the mainstream media? Even after 11 months of this, the nonsense that the Post, the Journal, the Times, CNN, others continue to publish because they're scared to death of Israel.
I don't even know what to say to that, man.
Yeah, they self-censor.
It's got to be like just go the Richie Torres route and just let yourself be bribed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I actually just heard from a friend of mine today about Torres, that a guy who's long-time anti-war, anti-nuclear weapons activist in New York. He said when Richie Torres was on the council, he was great. He was terrific. He was a huge ally of theirs. When he went to Congress and started getting the Israel money, 180 degrees.
The strategy of bribery works.
Yeah,
they found their strategy to tackle the squad.
Yeah,
just bribe them. It's crazy.
It is, or just put the fear of God in them, because that's the
other one.
Works.
Jamal Bowman.
Yep.
Bowman was what, $12 million, and Bush was $8 million.
It's crazy.
$20 million in 22. Just like that.
Yeah, they did it in 22. I think they spent about $25 million in 22, kind of proof of concept. I think they entered into 11 Democratic primaries and they won 10 of them. Summer Lee, I think, was the only one who didn't win. I'm here in North Carolina. They came into 2 of our primaries, the first and the fourth, I believe. They won those. And you would have had, if they hadn't, you would have had 2 progressives who would have been against Israel, who would have been against the genocide. In Summer Lee and I'm blanking on her name. I'm not Summer Lee. Nita Alam would have been representing Durham, and in northeast of the state, you would have had Erica. I'm forgetting. Sorry, but you would have had 2 people who were committed to to ending the Israeli occupation in the U.S. Congress in 22, right? And so as well as keeping Donna Edwards out of Maryland. Donna Edwards, one of the first people in Congress I ever spoke to about these issues. Back in 2010, I ended up sitting with her for some reason, or her schedule got screwed up, and I was just sitting there. We talked for like an hour, and this is what she wanted to talk about. She wanted to talk about AIPAC, and she wanted to talk about the Israel influence and how destructive it was, right? She never met me before, but she was so upset, and so distressed and frustrated by it. And then they got her out of office. Then when she tried to come back in, they spent an ungodly amount of money in that race in Maryland 2 years ago. So yeah, they have the ability to do it. They've got the money behind them. And so you see, AOC, maybe they couldn't beat her with the money. Like I said, maybe they couldn't beat her with the money in her current district. But just like they did with Bowman, they'll redistrict you. And now you got plenty of your folks in Queens, but guess what? Your district is now primarily Long Island. Yeah, you're not going to win, honey. I'm sorry.
Nassau County should get destroyed.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's wild. It's again another depressing topic.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's like I guess we'll just see how this all plays out. You know, it's as tragic as it is, it's going to be interesting. I'm hoping that a war doesn't break, like a larger scale regional war doesn't break out. But you know, like you said earlier, the unthinkable can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, man,
Matt,
again, guys, like just to wrap up, just the last thing I want to say, just to reinforce this, is best case, I believe, is what I was saying before. A year more of this for the Palestinians. For some reason, Netanyahu and his base, they kind of fall apart. Lapid or Gantz or somebody wins, and it goes back to October 6th, a year from now. That's the best case as I see it for the Palestinians. Another year of Gaza, another year of turning parts of the West Bank into Gaza, and then potentially a defeat of Netanyahu and his coalition in October, which the polls right now don't say is going to happen. You know, that's the best case I see it for the Palestinians. You know, and
yeah,
that's not even talking about Lebanon and everything else.
Yeah, even in this conversation itself, like we barely spoke about the Palestinians. You know, it's crazy, and I don't know, man. It's just it's so hard because it's man. I'll listen to like Norman Finkelstein interviews, and someone will ask him a question like, "Hey, so what's the hope of like, you know, this you know, the problem being solved or the Palestinians getting?" And he'll just be like, "There's no hope."
Yeah. I agree.
Like, how depressing is that to hear this guy who's been dedicating his entire life to you know, supporting Palestinians or documenting, really, I mean, his whole life has been documenting, you know, crimes against Palestinians, and his response is there is no hope.
Yeah.
And it's just
I agree. I mean, even in today, what I heard from Erdogan and King Abdullah was that's my interpretation. I'm probably wildly off base on that they might actually do something, which I put the chance of that about 3% anyway. But, you know, I mean, that's the best hope then, is that these nations in the Middle East come together and go to war with Israel to save the Palestinians. The Palestinians are going to be destroyed in the process. You know, a war in the West Bank, a war over the West Bank, how many dead Palestinians is that going to produce? You know, and that's fantastical, because I think, I mean, I heard what I heard today, but like the idea of it actually happening, I don't know, guys, you know, I mean, and that's best case. And so now I'm fantasizing, or I'm not fantasizing, but I'm saying like, this is what they're saying, to extrapolate from that, this idea of basically kind of a redo of 73. Can you see that happening? And if it does happening, what's going to be the consequence of the Palestinians anyway? I mean, so yeah, it's just, and now I got Thucydides in my head about how the strong will do what they want and the weak will suffer as they must, you know?
Well, I mean, when you look at mass atrocities, I mean, they're done under the cover of war. You know, it's so a larger war breaking out with just, you know, who you can only imagine it would be the worst case scenario for them living there.
Oh yeah, and we really didn't even get into like, you know, and we really didn't even get into like having this go further out, right? In the sense that in a war like this, what do the Kurds do? You know, what do the Azerbaijanis and the Armenians do? Right? You know, like extending it out that way, you know, like you're starting to see what happens in Cyprus. You know, Erdogan was going on about Cyprus today. Erdogan also was going on about how Turkey's always been a benefactor of the oppressed. They've always helped the victims, you know, and I think, you know, anyone who's Kurdish or Armenians didn't.
Yeah, right. I was just going to say, ask the Armenians about that.
Right, exactly. Or the Greeks, you know, I mean, so, but yeah, all those like second and third order effects, if you want to call it that, of, okay. We have people, I swear to God, you know, I swear to God, we have people in the U.S. who in the last years believe that we should get closer to the Afghan Taliban because we could utilize the Afghan Taliban to fight the Iranians, right? If it comes to that. Like, this is how we have people who think like that.
Well, they already have a lot of our weapons, so we wouldn't need to train them very much, right?
Yeah.
Or supply them, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, they had. Well, also, yeah. But that's the other thing too. Where would Israel get more manpower? And you've seen these things in the last few weeks about sending Afghan commandos to Ukraine and stuff like that. If you guys saw that type of stuff. But yeah, that's a thing out there. We pulled
That's wild.
all these Afghan commandos from the NDS, their version of the CIA. They had these strike groups that were, CIA run, alongside of our special ops guys. We pulled them all out, or as many as we could, but 10,000, 15,000, I don't know how many. And they're living like in places like Pittsburgh and Santa Fe, working as busboys,
The
so
new Mujahideens, right?
Yeah. So send them to, right, send them to Israel, that type of thing. This is how these people think, I mean, people listening to this, they're like, this is insane. This guy is just nuts, and no, we have people who think like this. Yeah.
Well, if you just read the, like the clean break paper and all that, I mean, it's all out there in the public. Like they write about this. So it's like, so the strategy is that, so these Muslims hate this type of Muslim. Right, so we're going to pursue a policy to get this Muslim to kill this Muslim. And, that's exactly how they think. There's some lineage of Muhammad that's different. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, hey, let's wrap this up because we're almost at 2 hours, and I can't believe anyone will be still listening. But thank you.
People are listening.
I know. I mean, but like,
this is great, man.
Let's go back to the Carter.
We love talking to you.
Let's go back to the Carter administration, right? And Zbigniew Brzezinski. And the whole plan, and if people remember 78, 79, there's all types of Islamic revolutionary unrest throughout the Middle East. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go look it up, kind of thing. But and I don't mean I shouldn't say it like that.
No, that's fine.
Like
Google it. Yeah.
Like that. But it's very interesting what occurs there and how little people know about that, right? I feel like how that history has kind of been forgotten about what the late 70s were like. We tend to focus on the Iranian Revolution when there were very real crises in Saudi Arabia and in Pakistan. But anyway, you got Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's the national security advisor for Jimmy Carter, and Brzezinski, who's a Pole, hates the Soviet Union like no one's ever hated anything before. And Brzezinski's idea, of course, becomes the Afghan War. And part of the idea, which he's successful at, is to bait the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan in order to give them their own Vietnam. And so what occurs is that the United States starts supporting and supplying and providing funding for the Afghan Mujahideen in 1979, at least 6 months prior to the Soviet invasion at the end of December 1979. And so Brzezinski brags about being successful about this. Gates brags about this as well. This is what happened. Now, what the other part of the plan was that these Mujahideen, by getting into this war against Islam in Afghanistan, Brzezinski's idea, his fantasy is that Islamic revolution would then be channeled up into the soft underbelly of the Soviet Union, into the Muslim republics, into all the stands, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, etc., and that would explode within the Soviet Union, right? And so this is where the Arab legions comes an idea. You got all these riled up Islamic revolutionaries in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and other places. Let's send them to fight the Soviet atheists in Afghanistan, and then from there they're going to push up and down, right? I mean, this is the type of thinking that these people have, right? I mean, this is a type of thinking that they have. They believe that, and sometimes they're successful. They did get the Soviets to go in. They gave the Soviets their own Vietnam. The consequences to us, of course, but that's lost because, last thing I'll say, I promise, is go back to February 2022. And when Russia invades Ukraine, what does Hillary Clinton say? Hillary Clinton basically, rubs her hands together, does like her best Mr. Burns impression of excellent, right? And because as she says out loud, now we can do to the Russians in Ukraine what we did to the Soviets in Afghanistan, right? I mean, completely misses decades of history, the blowback from that whole thing called Al-Qaeda, 20 years of American war, of direct American ground occupation in Afghanistan. Clinton, former Secretary of State, says, now this is great. We can do we can do the Russians in Ukraine what we did to Afghanistan, what we did to them in Afghanistan. And she's sincere about it, and these are the people we have in power.
Well, another thing, I got to add to this. So someone came up with the idea, and I get this goes way back before before the fall of the Soviet Union, but someone was like, hey, you know how like there's these people in Eastern Europe who like really, really hate Russians with all their heart? Well, you know, they might, I just want to warn you, they might, you know, carry swastikas. But don't let that alarm you too much, because they hate Russians and they're natural allies and they're, you know, they're natural freedom fighters.
Yeah.
If they have a swastika, though, if they have, you know, this guy named Bandera who's, you know, complicated, don't let that mind you. Don't let that bother you.
These people think
that
they think they're masters of the universe. They think history doesn't apply to them. Many of them are ahistorical. They're historically ignorant. They just don't even know these things. I mean, that's what I mean. The books that are read that are on the nightstands of these people on the National Security Council are not history books. I can guarantee you that.
They're romance
biographies
novels
of Stan McChrystal and stuff like that.
They're romance novels.
Wait,
but
Matt, did you hear about the guy who? So this guy, this Ukrainian World War II vet, spoke in like the Canadian Parliament.
Yeah.
And they're
2
like,
years
we
ago,
want to honor this
last year.
brave World War II vet from Ukraine. And it's like, come on, man. Like, I feel like people maybe 30, 40 years ago would have known that the Ukrainians took the side of the National Socialists during World War II. Like, wasn't that common knowledge that they were on the side of Germany during the war? And they're like, we got to honor. And then it comes out like this guy was like in the Gestapo, like the not the Gestapo. He was like part of like the Galatian SS.
Right. Yeah. He wasn't some kid drafted into the German army. Yeah.
He wasn't some guy in Vermont, or, you know, he was like an he was a part of the Galatian SS, and, you know, allegedly had committed, you know, crimes against the humanity against Jews and Poles and, you know, whatever other ethnic groups. And they were honored. And it's like, these guys don't know anything. Like you would think like just someone with any type of position of power would just have the self-awareness to know that.
Yeah, I could tell you a story I haven't spoken too much about. In the summer of 2012, I go to see a friend of mine. He's in the intelligence community. He's with I'll be as vague as possible with who he is. And anyway, he knows about what's happening in Syria, knows what's happening about Iraq, and he's pretty senior. And he is distraught. And what's going on, man? And he tells me about how we're trying to use Al Qaeda in Iraq, essentially, you know, to take down Bashar al-Assad's government. I remember him saying, like, these people think that they can point these guys, they can give weapons and money to these guys and point them west, and they're just going to do exactly as we tell you. They really believe they can manage these people. And, you know, we saw, of course, what happened with that, right? These people really believed that, one, they could control what was essentially the Islamic State, and that they would, first of all, only go west. They wouldn't turn around and cross the literal line in the sand back into Iraq, where most of them came from, where a lot of money were Iraqis, you know, and they believed this. And then, of course, not too much later, you had the leak of the DIA paper, essentially saying in the summer of 2012, this is what we're doing. This is incredibly dangerous, and it's going to blow up in our faces. And that's essentially what happens in Syria. You know, we try to utilize these jihadist elements for our purposes, thinking we can control them. And yeah, I mean, it's just these people, just if they even know about it, their hubris and their arrogance makes them believe that they will do it better. Right? You heard this when I was, you know, with the escalation of the war in Afghanistan. We just lost this war in Iraq. Why do you think it's going to work here in Afghanistan? Well, because we've learned the lessons. The generals know what they're doing now, you know, on and on and on. And so it is. It's maddening, and the process just keeps repeating itself, because the system, our empire, Imperial Washington, if you will, is set up at all levels to reinforce the defining narratives of our empire. And so no one is getting into positions who don't believe that. And if you're an honest person in DC, say you're an honest staffer in the White House, and whatever the policy is, say Ukraine policy, right? And but let's get some validation on this. Let's get some experts in here. Who are the experts who come in? It's General Breedlove. It's General Hodges. It's General Petraeus. It's General Keane, right? Call up Jim Mattis. Call up Mad Dog Mattis and see what he thinks about this, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's so the whole thing is corrupt. there's no honesty at all in the process, no intellectual honesty. There's certainly no moral honesty. But yeah, I mean, so, but yeah, no, guys, I appreciate this. I appreciate this very much. You
As
guys
do we.
yeah, and I really, I thought about one thing earlier that I wanted to say when we were talking about the polling and the public opinion on all this. If it wasn't for guys like you, and I'm being sincere here, I'm not, if it wasn't for guys like you, there's no way that American public opinion would have turned around on Israel. Last poll I saw nationwide, which was a couple months ago at this point, 55% of Americans said the United States military should not defend Israel in the event of a war with Iran or any of its neighbors. 55% were against the U.S. military defending Israel. That is insane. That is incredible. And the fact it's probably gone up in the last few months. The fact that the majority of American public is at that place right now, in spite of the fact that nearly our entire corporate media and our entire political elite is in complete lockstep, just repeating verbatim Israel's talking points, that the majority of American people have that opinion on Israel and have that understanding what's going on there, is because of independent media. Right. So thank you guys for what you're doing. And I also want to say it to the folks who are listening, help these guys out, support them. I don't know if they have Patreon or GoFundMe or I don't know, whatever.
OnlyFans, OnlyFans.
That's it. Yeah, right, exactly. But throw a tip, throw a tip on the OnlyFans for Danny. Buy him whatever's on his wish list.
Yeah.
Go ahead and buy him that. I'm outing myself for letting people know that I know that such things exist, I guess. But anyway, support them. Do what you can to support them. Support the other independent media voices you're listening to, you're learning from, you're communicating with. Because it's effective, and this is why they want to ban TikTok. Which let's not even start to talk about that because we'd be here another 2 hours.
Oh yeah. Well, now we really appreciate it. We're minor players, and so we're basing a lot of what we say off things of we're third parties of information at the end of the day. We're basing a lot of what we say off folks like you. I mean, Danny and I speak. We think so highly of you. We really appreciate it whenever you take time out of your day to speak with us and join us on this show. So we really appreciate you. And I've been a fan and a follower of yours for years now. Ever since I think I first probably heard you on Scott Horton's show, and I've been just a huge. Danny and I both have been just tremendous admirers of yours. But while you say the stuff about giving us a tip, it is a shameless way for us to plug real quick that we did actually set up a Substack where you can actually listen to all of our shows without any ads, any advertisements. And this Substack is going to be the kind of central hub, per se, where we publish articles, where we publish exclusive content. You get ad-free episodes and all that. So go to the Substack. We'll put the notes in the description, for that. You can support us there financially if you would like to get access to all this. It's $5 a month. Anyone who's currently subscribed to the Patreon right now, we're going to just comp your membership to it. So you're just going to get a free Substack subscription. So I'll just leave it at that. But Matt, we can't plug our stuff. You're the guest. So where do we find your work? Where do you, where can we find more of you? And
sure. And one thing just to follow up on what you're saying though, about how you're a minor fish, blah, 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 blah. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who you're going to inspire. You don't know who you're going to educate or inform. You don't know who you're going to get to question things. There is an incredible post today from Rania Khalek. I don't know if you guys know Rania. She's an independent journalist, Breakthrough News. She's someone, if people don't know her, follow her. She's terrific. I was fortunate to sit next to her and Ralph Nader about a dozen years ago at this thing. It was crazy, But anyway, Rania had this post today because Ta-Nehisi Coates has, I guess there's a big, in a New Yorker or I don't know, some magazine, a big this big profile of Coates, particularly about his change in attitude, his change in understanding of Israel and Palestine. And in that, he says that, well, what really happens for me is in 2014, he's at some event, and I start talking about Israel, and a woman stands up and she says things about how the Palestinians, and I don't understand what she's talking about, but it causes me to question what I just said. And he said that was where his turn on Palestine, and it turned out to be Rania Khalek, because Rania Khalek at an event stood up and said these things to him, and that caused Coates to, right? And the Coates, of course, is incredibly important in American society. I want to say incredibly, but like in terms of on the left, he's a major voice. I mean, so, you don't know who you're going to inform. You don't know who you're going to inspire, and you don't know who you're going to, be. Maybe it's the first time they've heard these types of things, and now they're going to start questioning. We all begin someplace. We all do. And so, yeah, don't say we're minor fish or whatever. You guys are doing your role. You guys are playing your part, and it's an important part. And this is what we have. And if segue back to TikTok again, if it wasn't effective, if you guys weren't scaring the hell out of the elites and the establishment and the empire, they wouldn't be banning TikTok. They wouldn't be forcing you guys to be on a Substack. And I guarantee you guys Substack will be around for 3 or 4, 5 years tops. Right? I'm going to predict that because they're going to shut it down, right? They're going to limit it. It's already, have you ever Googled something and seen a Substack? I Google myself all the time, right? Like if you do this type of thing, you do that. I mean, there's ego involved too, but totally. But you do it because you need to see, and nothing on Substack ever shows up on Google results, at least not for me, because they've delisted it, right? So you guys will be moving on to something other than Substack because they're going to, deplatform on you on that, or throttle Substack, or do whatever they can because you're a threat. And so, yeah, keep doing it.
Keep being threatening.
But anyway, okay. I'm on Substack.
We try to be humble, Matt.
I'm on Substack, by the way. Matthew Hoh on Substack, or whatever the address is. I don't know. And then it's on Twitter. It's Matthew P. Hoh, P as in Patrick, H-O-H. I'm on Twitter.
Cool.
And then every week I listen to Matt on Judge Napolitano show. I think you have a weekly spot there, right?
I do. I'm very lucky to be a part of that stable that Judge has. So 2 p.m. on Tuesdays. Before me today, I mean, it was, Craig Murray was on before me, Ambassador Craig Murray was on before me, and then Professor Jeff Sachs was on before me. The Judge's program is just really incredible. People like John Mearsheimer, Larry Wilkerson, Ray McGovern, just some really incredible voices of experience and of dissent. And so people can find me there. And I'm also the associate director of the Eisenhower Media Network. So if folks want to Google that, you'll find what we do through EMN.
Wonderful. Well, Matt, thanks again so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure, and I hope we do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Anytime. And thank you again for what you're doing. And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks, guys. All right. Danny, anything to add?
Nope. Peace.
All right. Peace.